Hey everyone, I'm Joshua Orro, the Mustang Prince, and welcome to Mustang Prince Orro Reports. Now, as I said in my previous episode, October has just begun. Unfortunately, this year's Halloween marathon, or Nightmare Month, isn't ready just yet. Mainly because there are 3 more movies that I still want to share with you before we get there. So, for today's episode, we're gonna go on an underground treasure hunt in one of my favorite movies from the 1980s. Released on June 7th, 1985, the movie is The Goonies. And now, on for the plot of the movie. This film centers on a band of adventurous kids known as the Goonies, who take on the might of a property development company which plans to destroy their homes in order to build a country club. When the children discover an old pirate map in their attic, they follow it to an underground cavern in search of lost treasure, but come up against plenty of dangerous obstacles along the way, along with a family of criminals. So, what are my thoughts on the movie? Well, not only was this film an absolute blast, but it was also very epic and thrilling. And to further explain why I love this movie, let's move on to Mustang Notes. The movie was co-produced and directed by the late Richard Donner, who directed the 1978 Superman movie, The Omen, Scrooged, and the Lethal Weapon quadrilogy. Also, the film's screenplay was written by Chris Columbus, who you may know for writing Little Nemo, Adventures in Slumberland, and Gremlins, and for directing the first 2 Home Alone films, Mrs. Doubtfire, the first 2 Harry Potter films, Rent, I Love You Beth Cooper, Pixels, Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, and The Christmas Chronicles 2. Plus, the movie's story was written by legendary filmmaker Steven Spielberg. Principal photography on The Goonies began on October 22, 1984, and lasted for about 5 months. An additional 6 weeks of audio dubbing and recording were used. The shooting script was lengthy at more than 120 pages, to which several sequences were eventually cut from the final theatrical version. Some of the on-location filming was done in Astoria, Oregon. The interior and exterior of the old Clatsop County Jail features as the holding place of Jake Fratellis at the start of the movie. The building was later converted into the Oregon Film Museum, which opened on the 25th anniversary of the Goonies with memorabilia from this and other local films. The museum where Mikey's father works at, in reality, is the Captain George Flavel House Museum. The Walsh family home is the real home on the eastern end of the town. The road leading to the home was closed to tours in 2015. The scenes along the coast were filmed in Oregon, but they were a considerable distance from Astoria. The Goonies bicycled to Ecola State Park, which was in reality over 26 miles south of Astoria, and then find the starting location of the map using Haystack Rock as a guide. Underground scenes were filmed at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, California, including the cavernous set where the Goonies find One-Eyed Willie's ship, which was in Stage 16, one of the largest sound stages in the United States. The final scene was shot at Goat Rock State Beach in Sonoma County, California. The movie also marked Wes Takahashi's first major motion picture as an animation supervisor for Industrial Light and Magic. Also to note, after The Goonies was released, it grossed approximately $125 million worldwide on a budget of $19 million, and has since become a cult film. And in 2017, the film was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or authentically significant. Now, I must confess, I never actually saw The Goonies during my early childhood, and I'm not sure when I actually first saw it on DVD. I mean, I know I must have seen it one day during class in my junior high or high school ages, but the only thing I do remember back then is that I unfortunately didn't watch it in full at the time. Maybe due to the fact that I either had to move on to my next class or I had to go home. But after renting it from Netflix and getting my own DVD copy sometime later, I realized how much of an awesome 80s classic this movie is. For example, I like the fact that the main characters are a group of kids, like in the Halloween Tree, the It movies, Earth to Echo, Monster Squad, and others. I also like that the plot centers on the kids going on an underground treasure hunt in hopes to save their neighborhood from being turned into a country club. Plus, I think the underground expedition is very thrilling, due to the caverns having creative booby traps and dangerous obstacles like falling rocks, firecrackers, a pit of spikes, a bone organ, and a treasure scale. And there's also the fact that there are 3 bad guys stalking and chasing the kids down there. Another thing that I like about this movie is the underrated soundtrack, which includes classic artists like Cyndi Lauper, REO Speedwagon, The Bangles, and others. And now, let's move on to the cast. The leader of the Goonies, Mikey Walsh, is played by Sean Astin, whom after this movie was in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, Balto 3, he voiced Shazam in the DC animated universe, and he voiced Hercules in the first Kingdom Hearts game. Mikey is an asthmatic kid who never goes anywhere without his inhaler, and in my opinion, Sean Astin does a great job for his first film role. Also, I like that Mikey is a fan of Superman and the Hardy Boys. Plus, before going on his treasure hunt with his Goonie friends, Mikey's dad used to tell him various stories of grand adventures, including the story of One-Eyed Willie, which to me does give a nice foreshadowing. Next is Clark Devereaux, aka Mouth, played by Corey Feldman, whom I remember from The Fox and the Hound, The Magic Voyage, 2 of the Friday movies, and Richard Rich's The Scarecrow. The reason why he's nicknamed as Mouth is because of his cheeky tongue. Plus, I think Mouth has a very sarcastic personality, and he does have poor taste in humor at times. However, I thought the most interesting fact regarding Mouth is that he's fluent in Spanish. Next up is Richard Wang, aka Data, played by Jonathan Ke Huy Quan, whom I remember from the second Indiana Jones movie. Now, Data may be the youngest and shortest of the Goonies, but I consider him as my favorite, mainly due to the fact that he has multiple inventions hooked up to his chest plate and belt, which makes him a lot like a walking multi-tool. Plus, he also wears a huge backpack where he keeps many useful items and tools. Plus, I find it interesting that Data is a James Bond fan. The next Goonie on our list is Lawrence Cohen, aka Chunk, played by Jeff Cohen, whom was a Callaway cadet in Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School. Chunk is known for being a chronic liar and for being gluttonous. However, I find Chunk to have a very interesting role in this movie. While the other Goonies are underground looking for One-Eyed Willie's treasure, Chunk gets captured by the Fratellis while trying to get to the sheriff, and he gets locked up with Sloth, whom he quickly bonds with. Next is Mikey's older brother Brandon, played by Josh Brolin, whom everybody knows as the Mad Titan Thanos, who wiped out half of humanity in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Brandon is the typical big brother kind of character who likes to tease and push his little brother around, and he also likes to work out. Plus, he's been instructed by his mom to watch over Mikey, and while doing so, Brandon usually bosses him and the other Goonies around, while trying to save them from certain death. Plus, while Brandon dismisses the stories of One-Eyed Willie and his lost treasure as nothing but nonsense, at least he has great respect for the dead. Our next character is Andrea Teresa Carmichael, or Andy for short, played by Carrie Green. Andy is a high school cheerleader who lives in the hillside part of Astoria. In my eyes, Andy is a very cute and attractive young lady. Also to note, she's romantically involved with Brandon, and she's also eager to spend some alone time with him and attempts to find ways to kiss him during the night that she spends with him and the Goonies. Plus, one of my favorite scenes is when Andy plays the bone organ in order for her and the gang to progress further in to find One-Eyed Willie's treasure, since she's the only one with piano experience. Next is Andy's best friend, Stephanie Steinbrenner, or Steph for short, played by Martha Plimpton, who would later voice Yelena in Frozen 2. To me, like most characters that Martha has played, Steph is a bit of a tomboyish kind of character, and she's described as kind of a punk nerd who looks up to Cyndi Lauper as fashion inspiration. Another character to talk about is Lotnie Fratelli, aka Sloth, played by the late John Matuzak, whom was an American football defense end at the National Football League. Sloth is a very tall and muscular character who has distorted features. To me, Sloth seems very sympathetic, not only due to his deformed face, which was molded with a combination of prosthetics, makeup, and animatronics, but also because he's abused by his criminal family, by being chained in a room, being tortured by Jake's terrible singing, and left with food just out of reach. However, I like that Chunk quickly sees past Sloth's features and makes a friendly bond with him. And at the end of the movie, Chunk adopts Sloth as his brother. Finally, we come to the movie's villains, the Fratellis, which consist of Mama Fratelli, played by the late Anne Ramsey, and her sons, Jake and Francis, played by Robert Davi and Joe Pantoliano. The Fratellis are a notorious Italian family of criminals who operate out at the Lighthouse Lounge, and they focus on printing counterfeit money. To me, this criminal family is very incompetent, but also very dangerous, especially due to them carrying guns, and I think it's also very gross that they dump dead bodies. And now on to my final words. Overall, The Goonies is an absolute classic from the mid-80s. The cinematography is fantastic, the story is creative and adventurous, the main characters are pretty rowdy but memorable, the villains are very threatening and dangerous, but pretty silly at times, the acting is spectacular, and the soundtrack is absolutely underrated. However, the only thing I kinda don't like in this film is that a few of the kids use swear words, which makes this movie not very appropriate for younger children to watch on their own. So, if you do plan to have your kids watch this film, make sure you see it with them. And don't worry, you'll all have a fun and thrilling time. And so, I give this movie a full 100%. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to join me next time, where we return to the happiest place on earth to look at a hilarious and zany 3D show starring the beloved Muppets. Mustang Power.